Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, February 23rd, 2017. New details emerge on the role of American Anwar al-Awlaki in setting up the so-called underwear bomber who tried to detonate his underwear on an airliner flying into Detroit. But it still doesn't justify the drone assassination of the American. Well, Scott Shane is a talented reporter with the New York Times. He wrote a book about the Awlaki killing. It's called Objective Troy. And the name Troy refers to a town in Ohio that was chosen as a code name by the CIA. It doesn't have anything to do with the ancient city of Troy and Trojan horses and that sort of thing. But Scott Shane is a dogged reporter, and he didn't stop reporting on this or researching it after he published his book. And in the show file for today's podcast, I've linked to his story today, actually posted on February 22nd, and the interview that I did with Scott Shane in 2015 after he had published his book, Objective Troy. And in the interview, you'll hear me pushing back on the justification for the extrajudicial process. Well, it wasn't a process. It was a decision made by the president after he was briefed by his operators, and he authorized the drone strike that did take out Anwar al-Awlaki. Now, what Shane is reporting today is information from the detailed interrogation and debriefing of the underwear bomber himself, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. And keep in mind that Abdul Muttalib was not tortured, and over the objection of many hardliners, he was read his Miranda rights at some point in the process. It wasn't immediately. And they chose to use a traditional method of debriefing him and trying to get him to cooperate. And by all accounts, it worked. The new documents, released after a 2-year legal battle under the Freedom of Information Act, fill in details on this episode. And it does show that Abdul Muttalib says that he approached Awlaki after he had become a devout Muslim. He's a rich kid who was studying in London. And he disclosed that, he volunteered for this operation, and he's offered details about his contacts with Awlaki, including an email just before he launched his plot, wishing him all the best. So this does provide greater detail, and it does buttress one of the central points that Scott Shane made in his book and in our interview, and that is that Awlaki had moved from becoming an advocate for jihad and a preacher who talked about the evils of America and various related matters, and he moved from being an inspiration, so-called, to jihadists, to becoming almost a field commander. And he set Abdul Muttalib up with the explosives that were supposed to be detonated on the plane. Abdul Muttalib, in his FBI debriefing, said that he was advised by Awlaki to cover his tracks by traveling from Yemen to an African country before booking his flight to the United States. The choices of exact destination and timing were left to Abdul Muttalib, and he said that his selection of Detroit and Christmas Day, December 25th, were random decisions dictated by ticket prices and flight schedules. And he said that he went into the airliner's bathroom. He was looking at the screen on the seat in front of him that showed their progress coming in toward the United States. He flew from Amsterdam. They flew over Canada. And then he looked and saw that they were approaching the U.S. border. He went into the bathroom to make final preparations for his attack, considered trying to set off the bomb while he was in there. But to be certain he was over American territory, he returned to his seat to check the map before he pushed the plunger under his clothing to mix the chemicals and ignite the explosives. Now, we're not sure why, but it misfired, and it burned Abdul Muttalib seriously. And when he tried to get his burning pants off before passengers jumped on him, A crew member threatened to throw him out of the plane. A passenger hit him once before another crew member intervened. And he began speaking to officials even before he left the plane, admitting that he had tried to set off a bomb and that he was aligned with Al-Qaeda. Then the FBI flew his parents in, and he surprised prosecutors by changing his plea to guilty at trial in 2011. Now, I find this all very interesting, and I want to acknowledge that it provides much more detail, and I can understand why some people believe that it's justified to take out what appears to be a field commander of an enemy group. But Awlaki, an American citizen, had rights. And the fact that he was in Yemen, the fact that he could be taken out by a drone, that does not waive the rights that he had. And his father even intervened and tried to get a court to make a preliminary or a preventive ruling to prevent the U.S. from executing his son without the required Fifth Amendment right to due process. And I believe that that was a fundamental mistake by President Obama. And not only was it unconstitutional, illegal, but I think it was also immoral. And worse yet, it set a precedent that can be used by the current occupant of the White House in ways that would be far more problematic than the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki. Following in the footsteps of Bush and then Obama, the Trump Justice Department is expected to assert state secrets privilege in the Washington state trial of the psychologists Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell, who were hired by the CIA as independent contractors to advise on torture. And their firm got over $80 million for the torture advice that was delivered to the CIA. And the case in Washington state before a federal judge is a civil case brought by two of the victims of the torture process that was advised by Mitchell and Jessen. So Mitchell and Jessen are asking for CIA brass to either give depositions or to testify at their trial to say, hey, look, all we did was follow orders. And if you want to blame somebody for illegal activity here or constitutional violations, it's, say, Gina Haspel. Gina Haspel was promoted by Trump to the number 2 position at the CIA just a couple of weeks ago. She's a career officer, and she's been linked to torture at a CIA black site in Thailand, where Mitchell and Jessen waterboarded Abu Zubaydah 83 times. And we know that, right? It's been confirmed. She also was the subject of an investigation which we're told cleared her when the videotapes of torture at the black site were destroyed under the orders of Jose Rodriguez, her then boss at the CIA. So her role is on the record. And now we're going to be told that it's a secret. And this is the Kafkaesque proposition that we've been dealing with now under a third administration. And it's mind-boggling, it is insulting, and it is intellectually bankrupt. So the Justice Department's grounds for asserting the state secret privilege is that the government has never officially acknowledged whether either witness, there's another John Doe witness at the CIA, had any role in the former detention and interrogation program. To confirm or deny that fact would itself disclose classified information. So they're going to hide behind secrecy, and claiming that admitting what we already know would breach government secrecy in some dangerous way. We heard this bullshit before in the opening weeks of the Obama administration in February 2009, here at a federal court in San Francisco. They used the state secret privilege to flush out a case brought by Binyam Muhammad. He had been renditioned. That means he was kidnapped, put on a private jet, and he was sent to, I believe, Morocco, where he was sent to Rabat, Morocco, where he was detained and tortured for 18 months, routinely beaten, sometimes to the point of losing consciousness, multiple broken bones. Genitals were cut 20 to 30 times. In one case, hot stinging liquid was poured into open wounds on his penis as he was being cut. That's not a secret. It's not a secret that a division of Boeing called Jeppesen Aviation, based in San Jose, provided the charter jet that delivered him to the torturers in Morocco. And yet we are now told that we have to pretend that all that was secret. And I blame Barack Obama, because he didn't prosecute a single one of the people involved with ordering the torture regime, much less those who carried it out. And this has enabled Trump, despite being at least temporarily blocked by the Secretary of Defense Mattis and others in his administration. But Trump believes that torture works. He wants to do some more of it. And Obama, by simply prosecuting Don Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney or his attorney David Addington, these are the people who put the torture program together. And by looking forward and not backward, as Obama so gruesomely put it, we are left with these ugly legacies. Now, this one's going to be spun up big time to justify the continuation of the prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, because a British suicide bomber who blew himself up in Iraq just last week, was released from Guantanamo Bay in 2004. Now, that was a long time ago. His given name was Ronald Fiddler. He converted to Islam and was known as Jamal al-Harith, also known as Abu Zakaria al-Britani. A 50-year-old guy. He got £1 million from the British government when, after a long campaign, Bush released him. And it was, 2004, it was 13 years later that he participated in this suicide bombing attack. Now, what will be left out of any discussion of this is that we cannot protect ourselves by locking people up for their lifetimes without charge or trial. And the idea that being sent to Guantanamo, and I don't know if Fiddler was tortured or not, but the experience is likely to radicalize an individual. And we never look at that. We never acknowledge that or even consider it. It's not part of the discussion. Everything the United States does is good, is justified, and these are just evildoers that we have to treat like animals. But when we treat them like animals, well, sometimes they respond that way. And so I'm sorry to say that this is just another way that ignorance and twisted information will be used to continue policies and practices that are deeply un-American. And it's interesting because the Daily Mail, the British tabloid, took a swipe at Tony Blair, who was the prime minister when this guy was released from Guantanamo. The headline read, "Still think he wasn't a danger, Mr. Blair?" And Blair called the Mail's coverage utter hypocrisy. He wrote that it's correct that Harith was released from Guantanamo Bay at the request of the British government in 2004. This followed a parliamentary and massive media campaign led by the Daily Mail. Oh, we live in very bizarre times. The Trump administration has its first scalp that it can claim was a foiled plot due to be launched this past Monday on the president's holiday. A domestic terrorism attack led by a 25-year-old Missouri man named Robert Hester. And in typical fashion, we learn, and I want to give credit to Murtaza Hussain, a reporter at The Intercept, who exposes how Hester, a 25-year-old stoner, a guy who's totally broke, drew the attention of not one but two paid FBI informants. And they set him up, just like has happened over 500 times before. This is a schlub who didn't even have $20 to buy some 9-volt batteries, duct tape, and roofing nails that his new FBI friends instructed him to get as part of his role in this plot. And they even threatened him to participate in this. Now, his case is complicated, like so many. He had a situation where he apparently went a little bonkers at a convenience store near his house, and it led to a prosecution and the discovery that he's a marijuana user. So he was taken into custody, released 10 days later, and that's when the FBI picked up on him. They started communicating with him before he was arrested and continued after he left jail. The agent raised the idea of firearms and suggested some ways that Hester could participate in a plot. And a few weeks later, the first agent set up a meeting for Hester with a second agent who posed as someone with direct terrorist connections. The meeting was held in an FBI car, and Hester brought his 2 young children, saying that he was in charge of child care that day. So this is just another sad sack story of entrapment, of headlines about the great protection that the FBI offers us from these daily threats of terrorism. And what they really did was just get him to agree to participate in a plot that they had laid out. So this is, I'm glad the news is being reported. You don't see this on television. You don't see Dateline or any of these other shows that talk about what great investigators they are, exposing this kind of incredible behavior by the FBI. But the information's out there if you want to get it. I've linked to it in the show file for the podcast. Also at The Intercept, Sam Biddle did a great piece the other day exposing Peter Thiel. You know who he is. He's one of the Silicon Valley billionaires who endorsed Trump. He spoke at the convention. He's out gay, and he's also deeply involved in the surveillance sector of our economy. He is a founder of Palantir, as exposed in this article, a lengthy expose, and Palantir got its first funding from the CIA's venture capital arm. Yeah, that's true. Called InQtel. Now, at this point, Palantir refuses to discuss or name its government clientele, despite landing at least a $1.2 billion federal contract since 2009. That's total contracts. Company is valued at $20 billion. And we know it produces 2 kinds of software, Palantir Gotham and Palantir Metropolis. Metropolis is pegged to quantitative analysis for Wall Street banks and hedge funds, and Gotham is designed for the needs of intelligence, law enforcement, and homeland security customers. So there's much more in the article. Check it out. It explains Peter Thiel's deep connections to the deep state. Every day I like to take a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Grant Gibson, who I met a couple of years ago up in Portland, Oregon, William Janetta, Benny Alto, he's also in Oregon, and Terry Paris in Berkeley. And let's thank Trudy Wall, who just renewed her annual subscription. Trudy and everybody else, I really appreciate your support, and I thank you for listening and help funding the Peter B. Collins Podcast. I invite you to join their ranks. If you've got a little money in the bank and you can share it, come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. Takes you to the sign-up page. That's where you get to choose $5, $10, $20 a month. If you're allergic to PayPal because, hey, Peter Thiel used to work there, he's one of the founders, you can send me a check or money order. And the information is all there on the sign-up page. Also, I do plan a Facebook Live event on Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern. Pandering to the elements of his base, the Christian right, and the ignorant people with low educations, and those who simply are creeped out by the idea of transgender persons, Trump basically repudiated his own position by rescinding protections for transgender students that had allowed them to use bathrooms corresponding with their gender identity. And he overruled Betsy DeVos, his education secretary. This is the first time I've found even a shred of a reason to respect her. But I'll say that this is surprising. Inside the Trump administration, she went to bat up against Jeff Sessions, who wanted to act decisively because of 2 pending court cases, and because he is a sick, twisted guy who likes to exploit the fears of other people. So apparently there was an Oval Office meeting on Tuesday and a showdown between Sessions and DeVos, and Trump sided with Sessions, told DeVos that he wanted her to drop her opposition, and she did. Now, she could have become the second person to leave the Trump administration, but I guess she decided not to pull the trigger at this point. And it turns out she does seem to have sympathies for LGBTQ persons that are not a part of her obvious conservative billionaire background with the Amway fortune there in Holland, Michigan. Good editorial in today's New York Times about this issue, noting that Trump had promised on the campaign trail to protect LGBTQ persons. And I remember seeing him strain to get all those letters out. They were written down for him. LGBTQ. Donald, quick quiz. What does the T stand for? Well, it's transgender. And the claim that he's simply saying that federal involvement is overreach and states' rights should drive this, well, we know that's bullshit. And I want to credit ACLU attorney Ria Tobacco Marr, who wrote a strong op-ed in today's New York Times, noting that Title IX is going to be the ultimate reason that she believes that Trump will fail in this quest. She writes, the Supreme Court is about to hear the case of Gavin Grimm, 17-year-old boy from Virginia, where the school district barred him from using the boys' restrooms because he is transgender. And we know that a lower court has ruled in his favor, and the Supreme Court is going to have to deal with this. And she believes that Title IX will prevail and that maybe even rational thinking will prevail. And I've gotten some flack because I flatly believe that this is not a big issue and it can be worked out by people in the bathroom. And I hear all these hysterical concerns that, men are going to cross-dress and go into the ladies' room declaring that they're transgender so that they can peek or try to grope or even try to rape. And frankly, that is a red herring. Because there are voyeurs and there are sexual predators. But they don't typically exhibit the symptoms of gender dysphoria. So the editorial in the Times noted that Jeff Sessions appears to have gotten the better of the president on this one. And they write, Trump has demonstrated time and again that his stated personal convictions are malleable. A genuine champion of gay and transgender rights would have steered clear of politicians like Sessions and Mike Pence, who have gone to great lengths to vilify and oppress gay and transgender Americans. Trump has also shot from the lip in a way that he may regret, because in a talk with a group of manufacturing executives at the White House, he said that we have a military operation to round up and deport undocumented immigrants. We're getting gang members out. We're getting drug lords out. We're getting really bad dudes out of this country at a rate that nobody's ever seen before. Well, so far, about 700 people, from what we can tell, have been rounded up. Obama deported 2.5 million. So I'm not sure that his claim about a rate that nobody's ever seen before really holds. And Trump has watered down, loosened the standards for who can be deported. Because up until recently, you had to be convicted of a serious crime to be subject to deportation. And now you merely need to be accused of virtually any crime, and the ICE gang can come and pick you up. So this comment that it was a military operation also is, I think, interesting because Governor Jerry Brown here in California rejected the idea that he would have to deploy the National Guard to assist the federal ICE agents in rounding up non-citizens for deportation. He read the language of the law, and it says that, only if there is some sort of an invasion can the National Guard of California be used for that purpose. So it's ugly, and it's going to get uglier, and a lot of people are going to get hurt. San Jose, which is the county seat for Santa Clara County, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, had a surprise flood yesterday. Coyote Creek flowed way out of its banks because the Anderson Reservoir that Coyote Creek flows into is all filled up. Can't take any more water, and they've been trying to get it out through the spillway on the other end. And this left somewhere around 25,000 people who were evacuated from their homes. This hit neighborhoods in the downtown San Jose area. And the other complicating factor is they report that the floodwaters include hazardous pollutants. But they don't tell us where those came from. I'd like to know more about that. Silicon Valley has a lot of toxic chemicals used in chip making and other processes. And the mayor of San Jose, Sam Liccardo, has been pretty frank. He said, the data we had never predicted that this could happen. And so it's back to the drawing boards as California deals with the heavy winter rains. We have a break right now, but more storms are due in this weekend. Now, here is a tale of two cops. One in Southern California, an off-duty Los Angeles police officer who lives in Anaheim, and by the way, that's in the next county, in Orange County. And a kid walked across his lawn. Well, let me get this accurately, because there's a group of teenagers roughly 13 years old. And bystanders who shot videos with their phones show an extended altercation between a boy, Christian Dorscht, and the off-duty officer, allegedly over words exchanged when a young girl walked across the officer's lawn. Now, we know about angry old men, get off my lawn. But this is an L.A. cop. He got into a scuffle. He dragged the boy around. And then two other teens tried to intervene to help Christian Dorscht. One attempt to break the officer's grip on Dorscht, while another rushes in, pushing the officer into a hedge in an apparent attempt to dislodge his grip. And then the cop pulls a gun from his waistband and fires after a tall teenager takes swings and punches at him. So there will be an investigation. The citizen video there is certainly helpful in trying to provide justice, and protests have erupted in Anaheim, the home of Disneyland, over this incident. Now, yesterday in San Francisco, a cop was trying to detain a homeless man who appeared to be high on drugs, who had pulled down his pants and was touching himself. Presumably he was masturbating. And according to a bystander who shot video there, the next thing you know, the homeless man jumps on the cop. And so citizens came to the assistance of the officer. 2 or 3 people came and helped to, pacify this guy who might have been on meth or something like that. As you may know, people like that have expanded muscular powers, if you will. And one of the people who intervened, whose name is Zubreyev, let me see if I can get his first name, Kirill Zubaryev, he said, "I'm glad the officer showed restraint. He did the right thing. He didn't reach for his gun. He tried to get the man on the ground without hurting him." Now, despite the outcome here, where the officer was uninjured, we have hardliners, the San Francisco Police Officers Union, demanding the deployment of tasers. Because after Eric Garner's death and the widespread ban on chokeholds, cops think that they don't have enough arrows in their quiver. Now, I reject that, and I reject tasers. They're almost as deadly as guns with bullets, and they're often abused and misdescribed as less lethal. Tea Party Tom McClintock is a member of Congress, a Republican from here in California, and like many of his colleagues, he has faced large, rowdy critics at town hall meetings during the presidential holiday congressional break. And this is a pattern we're seeing across the country. I applaud the activists who are getting in the faces of their congressional representatives about repealing Obamacare, about the immigration crackdown, and many other issues. And Tom McClintock went to Mariposa, that's near Yosemite. And when he does a town hall there, he typically draws 60 to 80 people. But the crowd on Tuesday was 10 times as large. More than 900 people were there, and most of them were not making America great again or supporting Trump. And one of the real ugly canards that I'm hearing repeatedly from Sean Hannity and others is that these are paid protesters, as if George Soros has 1 million people on his payroll to knock on congressional doors and demand meetings with the elected representatives. I've seen absolutely no evidence that anybody is being paid. But Trump repeats that, and a lot of other people on the right say that, and it's laughable. I'm glad to report and sad to report that the large-scale protest at Standing Rock appears to be behind us. I'm not sure what'll come next, but about 150 people marched out arm in arm from the camp yesterday on deadline for the evacuation. I understand about 10 people were arrested, but there were no major skirmishes, and I don't think they used water cannons, as far as I know. And we'll see where it goes in the courts. And finally, I want to talk about 2 people who've passed away. In today's San Francisco Chronicle, David Talbot, he was the founder of Salon. He's written a brilliant book or 2 about the deep state. And I'm really thrilled. The Chronicle recently added him as a columnist 3 times a week. And in today's column that I've linked to in the show file for the podcast, he talks about the memorial service for Tom Hayden, which took place this past Sunday at UCLA. More than 1,000 people were there, including his former wife, Jane Fonda, Dolores Huerta of the United Farm Workers, Bonnie Raitt, Bobby Kennedy Jr. And Talbot does a great job of explaining the different perceptions of Tom Hayden, the radical revolutionary from the Weather Underground, Chicago 8 trial, who, after he met Fonda, started a campaign for economic democracy, and he held office in the legislature here for almost 20 years in California. And this is a very honest assessment, which includes quotes from my friend Bob Scheer, Robert Scheer, his former wife and his current wife, both who knew Tom Hayden very well. I encourage you to read it if you have any interest in the legacy of Tom Hayden. And finally today, I mourn the passing of Alan Colmes. He was a radio host, very good at it. And despite his association with the Fox network, he was a guy who was very progressive, not as lefty as me. He's more of a middle-of-the-road guy. But he really, I thought, hosted a great radio show. And for about 12 years, he was locked in this ugly partnership with Sean Hannity on the Fox News Channel, where he had to play the second fiddle. And Hannity was always shutting him up and shutting him down and calling him names and, insinuating that he was crazy. And his role has been compared to that of the Washington Generals, to the Harlem Globetrotters, if you understand that reference. But I want to mention that Alan Colmes called me up a few years ago and invited me on his show to talk about the incarceration of journalist Roger Schuler in Alabama. And I appeared on the show, and after the interview, Colmes came back on the line and he said, "Peter, I really like your podcast." He said, "Would you mind if I put up a link on my website so that my listeners can find your podcast?" Now, people in this highly competitive industry don't do that. Alan Colmes was a really nice guy, and he may have been too nice. But I, for one, will not hold that against him. Alan Colmes, Tom Hayden, happy trails to you. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.